Okay.
Good morning. My name is Elisa Branches, and I'm an associate professor of literature in English at Rural Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. And currently, I'm the vice president of ABEI, the Brazilian Association of Irish Studies, a not-for-profit organization dedicated to the study of Irish culture, literature, arts, and history in Brazil, by promoting academic and cultural events, as well as sponsoring scholarships within Brazil and abroad. To better know the association and its scholarships, events, and publications, access the website www.abeibrasil.org and follow us in our social media, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. It is with a great pleasure that I participate in the third ABEI webinar series 2021, whose theme is the transformative experience of confinement in Emma Donoghue's Resilient Narrative Room, presented by Dr. Marisol Morales, full professor of Irish and English literature at the University of Alcalá in Spain. Finally, I'd like to thank our guest, Dr. Marisol, for accepting our invitation, also to the organizers, Caroline Eufrazino, Camila Franco Batista, and Vitor Augusto Pacheco, and to all of you who are watching us. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Elisa. Before I start, let me first of all thank the Brazilian Association for Irish Studies for inviting me to take part in this webinar series, especially to Mariana Bolfarine, the president, and Elisa, also the vice president, and also Victor, who is assisting me with all these technological issues. Now, I want to talk, can I have Victor, could I? Yes. Thank you. I'm going to talk about Emma Donoghue's novel Room, and I want to focus first of all on some important words from the title. The words that I want to focus your attention on is transformative, confinement, and resilient. So there's something that we have to bear in mind when we are dealing with Emma Donoghue's works, that they are very diverse, and I'll be talking about them a bit later. But although my intention in this talk is to talk about the reception of the novel, this novel has inspired a wider significance in our daily times, precisely because it talks about a harrowing account of confinement. But at the same time, this confinement has a transformative effect on the people, and it has, in a way, triggered a resilient behavior from the part of the members or the characters in the novel. So I'm going to emphasize this importance of resilience, which is actually a psychological trait that we nowadays are needing and we are developing in these lockdown times. And at the end of my talk, I will briefly comment also on the film adaptation of Room and also the stage version. And I will comment briefly on both of them because both were transcribed or converted by the author herself. So next. So along her very prolific and multifaceted career as a writer, Emma Donoghue has experimented with many different literary genres, and she also has a double nationhood. She is both Irish and Canadian. She was born in Ireland, in Dublin, but she moved to Canada 20 years ago, and she feels very happy anywhere. She actually doesn't emphasize the need to actually ascribe someone to a nationality. So since then, she's kept reinventing herself. Now, the exploration of a wide variety of issues, which mainly gravitate around dislocation and displacement, as well as the recovery of unheard voices from the past, mainly those of women, inform many of her plots. And this is just a sample of some of her novels, not all of them. From her early narratives, Stir Fry and Hood, they were published in the early 1990s. They were lesbian romances. And her provocative and very subversive short story collections, to her academic and literary history books, Donoghue has developed an appeal for characters who stand outside the margins of society. So it's very common that we find in her works troublemakers or misfits on the one hand, sophisticated eccentrics on the other, and many of them also conform her historical trilogy composed of Slammerkin, Life Maps, and The Seal Letter. Now, her more recent publications have widened the author's interest to include, for instance, a very important issue, which is emigration, as you can see, for instance, in Landing. Also, the revision of a motherhood theme that appeared originally in Slammerkin, but now in Room as well, and also in Frog Music. Also, transnationalism and liminality are issues that appear in several collections of short stories like Touching Subjects and Astray. Now, her most recent novel is The Pool of the Stars, and it is a timely account of the great flu pandemic that killed millions of people last century, and that resonates in so many ways with our present COVID pandemic. Next. Now, Room reached international acclaim as soon as it was published. It was in August 2010. Actually, in less than 1 year, it was awarded a large number of literary prizes. It was shortlisted for the Booker Prize, for the Orange Prize. It won the Hughes and Hughes Prize, and many others. And it was translated to more than 30 languages. So it turned into a literary hit because it was the story of the survival of a secluded mother and her child under appalling circumstances. And also it was about a later adjustment to real life, to society. So readers were attracted worldwide, mostly driven by the apparent connection of the plot with the experiences of long captivity of Elizabeth Fritz or Natasha Kampusch, among many others that we'll be talking about later. So, however, as the author has explained, these stories were only the tip of the iceberg, since her interest did not lie on the side effects of such traumatic hardships, but quite the contrary, on the strong mother bond that was established and which secured their final survival and adaptation to society. So in my talk, I will be arguing that Donoghue's narrative can be read as a superb account of the phenomenon of resilience, which is a psychological construct that explains how, under extreme circumstances of distress, human beings can develop an unexpected capacity to cope with pain and suffering. Now, this should not sound so different or very different to what we are going through now in every country in the world. So to me, this novel, the mother-son bond is presented as the pillar upon which the child's eventual hardiness is erected, turning the novel into a celebration of life and not into a dramatic account of a human struggle and agony to survive. Next. Now, most reviewers of Emma Donoghue's Room initially, this is the early reception, directed their focus of attention to the traumatic sources of the novel, mainly the cases of Elizabeth Fritz and Natasha Kampusch in Austria, Sabine Dardenne in Belgium, or Joyce Lee Doggart in California. And they classified the novel as a captivity narrative. But the author soon tried to correct this view and to explain that she was initially inspired by these stories, but that later her intention was to look at child development and parent love in such a way that the reader would not focus on the horror of the story, but would feel that it was a journey from one world to another. So her research was based on different resources about feral children, child psychological development, children born into captivity and conceived through rape, family, and resilience, in order to finally prove that human beings are all capable of overcoming pain and trauma, and that even though we are passive, we feel that we are passive victims of life, of society, of politics, of many other things, actually we have a lot of agency. And that is a very positive message that the novel actually triggers. So this also is proved by the fact that the author decided to narrate the story not from the point of view of the mother, who was going through the trauma, but from the point of view of the limited perspective and blissful perspective of the child. So in her own words, and this is a quote, she said, "Our culture is constantly telling stories about cycles who capture women. I deliberately kept my cycle out of the spotlight. It was not all Nick's evil that fascinated me, but the resilience of Ma and Jack, the nitty-gritties of their survival, their trick to more or less thriving under apparently unbearable conditions." Next. So told entirely then from the perspective of a 5-year-old boy, our room is divided into 5 parts, and these 5 parts follow the developmental stages of a child. And here in this case, it witnesses how he perceives his surrounding world, always separating 2 different settings, before and after confinement, and outside and inside society. So having been made to believe that his world, the world of room, is the only world that exists, the first part of the narration focuses on their daily routines and actually on the delight that mother and child share during their incarceration, while the second focuses on their freedom, which rather than putting an end to their horror, raises issues of social acceptance, discrimination, education, morality, and many others. Now, many of these concerns are obviously problematized in the course of the novel, especially in the second part of the novel, by means of the contrast driven by dichotomies, binaries, dualities, it doesn't matter how you will call them, which are confinement, escape, trauma, normalcy, reality, fantasy, capture, captive, inside, outside, before and after confinement, with the idea of precisely challenging the concept that freedom would give them this happiness that they were lacking, and at the same time proving throughout the reading of the novel that society is not so is not so favorable to their acceptance in society. So many of these concerns are problematized by means of the contrast driven, and through Jack's innocent mind, it is the adult reader who is made to question precisely the pillars upon which the fundamental values, our values, the values of society are risen, and problematizing the meanings that culture ascribes to the roles of parenthood, child raising, mental health, or education. So in the course of their painful adjustment to a society that expresses as much compassion as rejection, resilience is the resourceful skill that keeps them at a psychological balance. So therefore, by the end of the novel, received interpretations about social values, the manipulation of the media, the role of education, motherhood, schooling, and even the limits of mental stability will be disputed. Next. So I'm going to focus now on resilience, and because resilience is the fundamental aspect that Donoghue explores in her novel. Now, resilience is the capacity of human beings that human beings might develop under dreadful or stressful conditions, not only to overcome distress and pain or trauma, but to benefit or learn from it. Now, in the course of our lives, all human beings, we all go through different kinds of circumstances. Some of these circumstances might be painful or stressful, but some people experience through this unbearable pain and even trauma. Some of these people might end up suffering from a post-traumatic stress disorder or any other kind of pathology, but many others not only learn how to face and come to terms with adversity, but they are also rebuilt by it. Next. So resilience is a fundamental trait also of the personality of human beings, and it's also a fundamental trait of our present times. But it requires the conjunction of several components. Well, first of all, the facing of risk, trauma, menace, anything that challenges human development, and the display of competence to cope with it. And we have a clear example nowadays with the COVID and the way we are dealing with it. And we all have stories. We know people who are actually accepting it and actually learning and growing out of it. And we know people that are really going through bad times, not only because they've gone through the illness, but also because their lives have changed so much that they don't know how to deal with it. So the second component would be the resistance and the recovery from the incident. And the third one is the positive adaptation through the confident use of psychological resources that lead us to overcome further hardships. All these three main components are studied by positive psychology. Most of the research carried out in this area has come from this positive psychology approach, which is a humanist trend within the field of psychology, which explores the conditions and the circumstances that lead human beings to develop their strongholds and affirmative aspects, instead of focusing on the pathological states that define some human behaviors. And this has actually characterized most mainstream psychological framework. So, in fact, one could argue that some psychologists say that concentration exclusively on the potential pathological effect of the traumatic experience has precisely contributed to the development of a culture of victimhood, which has seriously biased psychological research and theory and has led to a very pessimistic view of human nature. Next. So resilience is not only a personality trait with which people might be born with. Resilience is the result of an interactive process between the individual and the environment, which involves the conjunction of social and psychological resources. Now, the interaction of emotional, cognitive, and sociocultural factors is what influences human development and is a result of temperament, family upbringing, social ambience, and many other factors. The factors that can prompt a resilient response can go from personality traits like self-esteem, confidence, and being able to cope, feeling that you are able to cope, social support, perceiving life meaningful, and I go back to this idea a bit further on because it's very important, and also the capability to discriminate positive to negative experiences. You know that we all experience, we might experience the same thing, but we all experience it differently because we filter the experience through our own minds. So my argument is that in Donoghue's novel, and in spite of the restrictive lives that mother and child go through, most of these features are developed, and actually they are responsible for transforming their captivity into an experience of growth. And precisely the features that prompt their resilient behavior are a competent parenting together with a strong bond between mother and child. Next. So at the root of their resilience, we can identify this special bonding that is established between the two of them. This includes, although it's not fundamental, but this includes breastfeeding in confinement. Obviously, in her case, Ma, the protagonist, is breastfeeding Jack because it's the only means that she has to secure that Jack will receive enough nourishment. So even though he's 5, through breastfeeding, she makes sure that he receives a good feeding. So also it is very important to stress the fact that she is called Ma only, and she performs no other role, and is not even seen as a young woman until halfway through the narration, when she recovers her name, and we know that her name is Sharon, and the need to reclaim an identity of her own as a woman and not only as a mother. On the other hand, after all the years of failed attempts to escape or being rescued, they were digging holes or screaming, flashing lights, leaving notes in trash bags, and so on. She says that she felt safe when she found herself pregnant, even though in confinement. And actually, she began to be polite to her captor with the only purpose of keeping her son safe. So this actually brings us to the second idea, which is about the contradictions and complexities of motherhood, and then which are present in the novel. Now, for the author, this is a quote, motherhood, even under such ideal circumstances, has elements of nightmare as well as fairy tale. And the author wanted to capture both things. In fact, the novel Room was dedicated to her children, Finn and Una. They were 4 and 1, respectively, when she was writing the novel. And in the dedication, she says, "My best works." And this dedication is followed by a poem, and the poem is precisely about the contrast between the concern of a parent, the worry, the preoccupation, and the placidness and the happiness of a child. At the same time, in the novel, motherhood is not an antidote against the horrors and the regular sexual abuse. Is raped every other day. At night, Jack has to hide away in the wardrobe so that when old Nick comes, he doesn't know what is going on. He only hears the creaks of the bed, and he counts at the creaks of the bed. But keeping herself mentally well is not easy during confinement. Ma goes through depressive states that force her to stay in bed all day. When this happens, Jack says that Ma is gone. And when Ma is gone, Jack watches TV all day, prepares his own meals and her meals, and wonders actually what would happen if his mother were off for more than one day. He also asks himself why his mother is on painkillers all the time, and this gives us the idea of the distance that exists between his placidness, his blissful perception of reality, and her pain, her trauma that she has to endure every day. In spite of their confinement, however, Jack's microcosm and Jack's upbringing is not poor in stimuli. So although they live in a microcosm, in a very small room, and they have nothing with them, his mother fills his imagination with stories, rhymes, songs, literature. And this obviously is an appraisal of the educative value of books that is developed by the author. So Ma protects him from the excesses of TV. She only lets him watch one show at a time, to avoid precisely TV, she says, rotting our brains, but also to keep him away from the damage that the awareness of an alternative existence could actually cause. So also what we can see is that every object is capitalized and personified. This is very realistic. This is how a child apprehends the world. For children, everything has a personality. They develop sentimental connections with things. And this is part of the real developmental psychological stages of any child. So Jack develops this sentimental, emotional connection with his rock, and also with his mother's tooth. And actually it is the symbol that keeps him safe and that he takes with him when he escapes. So Also, adding to this, there is something that they have, which is a purpose in life, in spite of the circumstances and these adverse circumstances, and also considering that Ma was only 19 when she was kidnapped, and she's been kidnapped for 7 years. She behaves as a resourceful mother who gives meaning to everything they do through a daily routine. Suggesting also that there is something natural or naturally driven in mothering. So her concerns about the education of the child go from teaching him to read and write at a precocious stage, developing his creativity, recycling anything into useful tools or toys, setting up meals at regular times, going through personal hygiene, practicing physical exercise, doing the cleaning, singing, and also laughing together. So her soundness is extremely determinant for their eventual adjustment to society, since, as the author has explained also in an interview, in words that look so close to our current lockdown times, I'm going to quote, "It can seem a bit absurd and sad, like they are prisoners passing their time. But it has actually given Jack the mental tools he'll need when he's out there in the real world. She's managed to create the sense in him that there is a meaning and a pattern to their days. Basically, I think if she didn't have some kind of faith that one of these days they will get out, she would have curled up in the corner long ago." So this, end of quote. This quote actually evokes the ideas and the theories later developed by Viktor Frankl. I'm sure he is known to you. He is the well-known Austrian psychologist, and he was a Holocaust survivor. He argued in his very well-known Man's Search for Meaning that what kept him alive when he was imprisoned in several Nazi concentration camps was having a purpose, having a reason to live. In fact, when he recovered his freedom, he founded logotherapy, which is a school of psychotherapy that holds that the search for a meaning in life is the central force driving human motivation. So this sense of hope and especially of direction that Ma instills in Jack, no matter how pointless it might seem given the circumstances, acquires an invaluable significance because it triggers resiliency and allows them to overcome their torture and letting them be almost psychologically intact. So not surprisingly, further on in the text at the psychiatric hospital, the mother insists that Jack does not need to go into therapy because she kept him safe. Also, at the end of the novel, the grandmother takes the child home in spite of the disapproval of the doctor and insists that he doesn't need to go into therapy because he was untouched by trauma. However, society, and this is the second part of the novel, does not welcome the child. And in fact, society others him because society sees him as little more than a pint-sized hero, a bonsai boy with a long-term developmental retardation. And he goes through a dehumanizing process, which is actually stressed by both his biological father, who addresses him with an it, and his grandfather, who uses the same impersonal pronoun. So what happens is that society is shuddered by the looks of this boy, who is only seen as the son of a kidnapper and a rapist, no matter how much the mother insists that Jack is only hers. So therefore, he's othered by a society that does not accept difference. Next. So it does not surprise then that when Jack, who never experienced any kind of anxiety or sleep problems while he was in room, now all of a sudden he's troubled by nightmares at the hospital. He then insists to go back to room because that's where he felt safe, and the doctors maintain that he is safe now in society. And he says, and I'm quoting, actually he got it backwards. In room I was safe, and outside is the scary. End of quote. So from a societal perspective, Jack has lived in a very unhealthy environment that has engendered his physical and psychological development. It is true that he is undersized. He has sight and hearing problems. He bangs on things because he can't measure space correctly. He has fears, and he has obviously socializing deficiencies. Besides, his immune system, his sensory modulation, and his perception need to be readjusted before he can fully integrate in society. However, the moment the mother is made to believe that his upbringing was dysfunctional from the society perspective, she tries to commit suicide, turning then their socializing process into the real nightmare of the story. Now, it is Jack who saves her for the second time, precisely and thanks to this secured bond. And ironically, he also saves himself because he has to go to hospital again, and there's a forced separation between the two, which initiates his own path towards autonomy. At this stage, Ma realizes that the world that she left behind when she was confined is a very different world that she finds now. Of course, she was a young woman then, and now she's a mother, and she has to come to terms with her new identity. But in spite of this unnatural developmental process outside society and under appalling circumstances, her singular upbringing, both protecting and encouraging, is what has raised this resilience nature. It's interesting, for instance, when she defines a child care center, and she says that a child care center is a building where parents send their kids when they're busy doing other stuff. And that seems most appropriate, since Jack's parental monitoring has provided him with an invaluable personal strength, self-esteem, and psychological well-being. So it is true as well, and this needs to be stressed, that though both mother and child display resilient behaviors, Jack will be more socially responsive and more capable of adjusting than Ma, because experimental studies in psychology have proved that children are more capable of building resistance against the hardiness of life than adults. And then adults exhibit fewer behavior and that children exhibit fewer behavioral problems because they interact more. So the first day of their freedom, both are sent to hospital, and Jack is amazed at everything he sees, but he longs back to go to room because now his mother is not paying that much attention to him. He is not breastfeeded anymore because society sees that is odd since he's 5, and he has to wear a mask because of his weak immune system. Now, as he has never interacted with people before, he cannot read through social behavior or emotions. So he takes everything literally, and he feels completely confused. Ironically, the nurses, in order to keep him entertained, let him watch TV. But what he watches on TV is far more brutal than anything that he had experienced before. For instance, they are both in the news all the time, and they are the subjects of disproportionate descriptions of how they are in a borderline catatonic state and so on. This is certainly much more damaging for him than the 5 years that he has spent in captivity. So up until the moment the mother is interviewed, it never occurred to her that she did not provide her son with the best education. And when the option of having given him in adoption comes up, she insists that the only thing a child needs is love and protection, which is exactly what Jack had. So her therapy at the clinic is defined in terms of psychological concepts such as separation anxiety, social reintegration, or self-blame. They also even suggest that Jack is fortunate that he is so small because he will be able to forget. But ironically, from Jack's perspective, there's nothing that he needs to forget, since he never experienced any danger And in room, in fact, he felt much better. And that's the question you have on the screen when he asks his mom, why is it better out than in? Ma said it would be free, but this doesn't feel like free. So he has exchanged one way of confinement for another in hospital, where he feels locked in. As he progresses in his adjustment, social criticism becomes bitter and bitter. He says, I'm learning lots more manners. When something tastes jerky, we say it's interesting, like wild rice that bites like it hasn't been cooked. When I blow my nose, I fold the tissue so nobody sees the snot. It is a secret. If I want Ma to listen to me, not some person else, I say, excuse me. Sometimes I say, excuse me, for ages. Then when she asks what it is, I don't remember anymore. So the novel, rather than dramatizing the struggle to survive in concealment, actually celebrates life. So after this dreadful experience, we leave them at the end of the novel ready to go back to social normal functioning. At the end of the book, Jack insists on going back to see room. And it is at this point when the reader realizes that he is now ready to start his social journey towards adaptation, since he sees room, a place where he was most attached to, under a completely different light. And this is the quote. We step in through door and it is all wrong. Smaller than room and emptier, and it smells weird. Nothing says anything to me. I don't think this is it, I whispered to Mom. Yes, it is. Our voices sound not like us. Has it got shrunk? No, it was always like this. So the novel ends with mother and child saying precisely goodbye to room and putting an end to their previous life. Next. So the novel in the end celebrates life, and the novel was published in 2010, but in 2015 there was a film adaptation of the novel. The most important thing of this film adaptation is not that it was very successful. It won 4 Oscar nominations, including Best Direction and Best Adapted Screenplay, and it received an Oscar. But the most important thing is that Donoghue wrote the screenplay for Room before she published her novel. And she did it because the film gave her the opportunity to tell the same story again, but now from the point of view of the mother. In the film, she is center stage. So, and it is true that the first reviews of the novel talked about how irritating it was for some readers to be in the mind of a 5-year-old child. So the author felt that in the novel, she was limiting herself to Jack's point of view, while it was a challenge to tell the story again from the point of view of Ma. So in her own words, I'm reading from the quote, I had a good feeling the story was cinematic. I thought, well, I'll draft a screenplay so that when I choose a filmmaker, I can be very honest and show them my draft. I kept waiting for something to happen that would make me feel betrayed and alienated in the traditional way that writers often report their encounters with the film industry, but it never happened. On set, I was a fascinated observer. The writer puts everything she can into the script and communicates it to the director. You really are handing the story on for all these people to tell. Next. So the next stage in her writing of Room was precisely to adapt. That was a new challenge, to adapt the novel to the stage. And for these, in this case, we made many more changes, as you can see from the pictures there, because she introduces racial issues as well in the stage. In the case of the stage version, again, she was in charge of it because she wanted to introduce new themes. And she says that she didn't want to replicate a realistic setting, but to bring back the elements of the book that are theatrical. Now, it was premiered in the Abbey Theatre in 2017. It has beautiful songs by Cora Bissett, and if you have the chance to actually Google it in YouTube, you will listen, you will hear her voice on stage, which is beautiful. Then Room went into further extensive development and rewriting for the North American audience. And unfortunately, when it was premiered in London, Ontario, it had to be cancelled because precisely that very day, 13th March, lockdown was initiated. So it is very ironic. A play that emphasizes a novel, a narrative, that emphasizes the power of resilience, had to be cancelled precisely the day the COVID pandemic brought lockdown, because this would have taught us a lot of things. So this is what I have to say. Thank you very much for listening. And open to questions now.
Thank you very much, Marisol. I have some comments and questions, I think, and I invite everybody who's watching us also to send their questions through YouTube chat. So the first thing I would like to, it's more like a comment rather than a question, is that sometimes I am a little bit skeptical about some kinds of effects, especially resilience, because I think that is some effects are co-opted by media and the social stream that is, and also by capitalism. So, and when you were presenting your talk, I was thinking that resilience explained a lot of things throughout the novel, especially the part of the interview when Ma gives the interview and the interviewer is like very harsh on her. Why did you keep the child? So it's a rape child, you know. And resilience explains this, her way to navigate through her experience. And another thing that was also thinking when you're presenting is that, first of all, I was thinking that it was a problem from the plot. This thing that his grandmother didn't want him to go to therapy, and then I was thinking about there is a kind of generational thing that my generation right now wants to go to therapy, you know, and other generations saw therapy as like, you were crazy. It's like therapy equals crazy, so a kind of craziness. So that also explained why she didn't want him to go to therapy. And now it's a question that I like to know about. On our last meeting of our book club, we were wondering, because as you said in the beginning of your talk, that Emma Donoghue writes more about how can I say it, misfit characters, queer characters, and she receives a lot of attention when she released and Rome is released as an adaptation. So I would like to know, why do you think that Rome received so much attention and the other novels from Emma Donoghue did not?
Well, actually, I think that many of her novels have received a lot of attention, but it has varied in times and for different reasons. What it is true is that Room became a bestseller. And actually, Room drove readers to other previous works by her. And so I think she has turned into a really, a wide-known writer precisely because of Room. And why did Room become such a literary hit? Probably because of the story. The story is very intense, and even though some people I love the novel, but I know people. I've actually lent the book to some friends and people, and they couldn't finish it. I mean, I know people who couldn't finish the novel. Partly because of the point of view. I mean, you have to, you really have to enter into the mind of a 5-year-old, so everything is limited. And partly because it is a hard story. At the same time, there's a deep interest in these kinds of stories that arise this emotional strength in people. So it's very intense, but it is very claustrophobic as well, if you think about it. So unless you're really interested in exploring, the states of the mind and, and human psychology, you might not be interested in the novel. But it became a success because at that time, in the early 21st century, there had been several stories of women who had been kidnapped at the same time. For her, as she said, that was the tip of the iceberg. That was not her point. Obviously, she was acquainted with the stories, and it aroused her interest. But so there was a mixture of many things, and then this success has been increased every time she has adapted the novel into a different form. And I think it is important to stress that she has been the one who has adapted her own text into a different form, changing completely the perspective. You've seen the pictures in the stage play. On stage, you have 3 characters, not 2, because you have Jack, his mom, and Super Jack. So there's an adult Jack and Jack, and they're always dressed the same. I mean, there are many short video clips that you can watch on YouTube, and I really advise you to watch them. The singing is absolutely beautiful, but also you can listen to a few minutes, and it's so interesting because in order to make it more appealing, I suppose, that on stage you can't have a 5-year-old child talking and being, and being able to transfer the meaning of everything. So you have Jack, who is 5, he expresses himself as a 5-year-old, and you have Super Jack, who is, who kind of translates for an adult how he feels. So it's so interesting, and it's so different at the same time. And also the film, it's a beautiful film, but it is true, it changes the perspective completely, because it was written, well, it was directed, but it was the screenplay, it's a scene from the point of view of the mother. And for Emma Donoghue, it was very important to let the 2 of them have their voices. And I found that actually fascinating, because many writers are more purist than, they write something and they want everybody to stick to the text. Whereas Emma Donoghue seems to be very open to multiple perspectives, and she emphasizes that there's a multiplicity of perspectives and that reality is a construction, and that we can construct it differently.
Yes, I agree with you. So Nayara Garcia from our audience said, I agree with Marisol. I had seen the film already, but I only read the book this year. It takes a toll on you when you read it, and made it of a pandemic. And it's also interesting that her Emma Donoghue's latest novel, it's also about a pandemic. So when I was reading, I read twice, so the novel, and I also was thinking about this relation between freedom and captivity, right? Because as we're living now, especially in Brazil, things are very strange. So this feeling of being closed and having your freedom limited, it's very intense right now.
Yes, you feel it. We live in confinement, and there are many different ways of defining confinement, but it is confinement because we have, our freedom is restricted, and there are so many other things there are many things that we can't do that we used to do. At the same time, we are adapting ourselves to new ways of relating to people. Resilience, would tell you that you should focus on what you are gaining and not on what you are leaving behind, because we can't change reality. This is part of how we adapt as human beings, and we can only be kind of happy if we adapt to reality. That doesn't mean that we have to accept everything, but means that if we change the focus, we'll also change the result in many ways.
Thank you, Marisol, for this great lecture. It was fantastic. I don't know the book. I read a little bit about it, but now I'm really interested in reading the book and watching the film and looking for the stage production. And I was thinking now, if you could comment on the fact that this woman that has these different identities as a victim, as a mother, and when she she started, I don't know if her story before being kidnapped is told in the book. I don't think so.
No.
Yeah, no, yes. And then, so she was a young girl, and then she became a mother. And after that, after escaping, she became a victim. And it interested me a lot if these different identities and playing different roles. How is it in the book, or if you could comment a little bit? I was curious about that.
If I could clarify, it's very important what you mentioned, because she turns into a victim in the eyes of society, but she is not a victim, and she refuses to be seen as a victim. That's what I was trying to emphasize. I mean, obviously, society sees a young woman who is 19, who's lost her life because she was kidnapped when she was 19, and now 7 years, she's 25 now, 26. You know, and she's a mother now. But she doesn't want to be seen as a victim. She has enough on her plate that she has to learn and to find her identity again. Because, you know, also when she is released, you know, when she finds her freedom, she goes back to her home, and her home is different. Her mother has divorced in the course of these 7 years. Well, I don't really want to bring too many spoilers if you haven't read it, but anyway, her reality has changed. But she doesn't want to be seen as a victim, and she doesn't want anybody to see Jack as a victim.
So maybe that's why she doesn't want him to go to therapy.
I think the reason why she doesn't want him to go to therapy, and also her mother, you know, the grandmother, is because they want to emphasize how he is fine. Obviously, it is very unlikely. I mean, if he were a real person, he would not go to therapy at some point in his life, because the experience was, experience very limited. You know, it's very extreme in many ways. But at the same time, he's fine. He's fine. You know, you have to give him the space that he needs space, and you have to give him the space and the time for him to develop. Maybe, you know, he's an adolescent, he would need to go to therapy, but they wanted to emphasize, both of them, that he was fine, and he was fine. He was fine.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, and I was just curious about that, and also this very extreme situation of being born in a room like that, in captivity. So all his references were there, those references of objects and this relationship with the mother, and wow, it must be really great. I'm curious to see it, and also the shock, maybe the shock of facing the world with so many colors and lights and movement and things.
You will love the book. If you're interested about how she becomes a mother, I won't say anything else, because they would be, I will spoil it. But you really should read the novel and see, you know, how that takes place. You know, she gives birth on her own and everything. You know, I find the novel beautiful, but I know people who couldn't. I continue reading.
So it's better to read the novel first.
Oh yes. After that, I mean, the film is a very good film, but it is a different experience. It is a different experience.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yes, I am also interested about how violence is represented through language. When you mentioned that Jack was counting the strokes on that, you know, I think that's one of the reasons why many people cannot read, I think, because there's a lot of violence that is not represented visually or in words, but the reader, it's the reader who has to come up and bring the reference to the novel. So the thing is very interesting also. And I think that language is very important also in the novel, because we have the experience from a 5-year-old boy. And could you tell us more about the language and the narration?
Well, I found the language beautiful, and I was also when Emma Donoghue wrote the novel, her son was 4 and her daughter was 1, okay, and Jack is 5. But when I was reading the novel, my son was 6. And it's interesting because there are some rhymes and some books that I could relate to them. And I even Dora the Explorer, it was one of these TV shows that my son was very fond of watching. And Jack is obsessed with Dora. She likes Dora as well. And there were some. She only has 5 books, okay. But there are some rhyme books that she had that I had already read to my kid. So Jack's language is the language of books. I mean, his language is the language of his mother and the language of the books. He keeps reading the books all the time. I mean, if the 5-year-old children don't read yet, I mean, with 5, you know, unless you're precocious, with 5-year-old children can identify some letters and can put maybe together 2 or 3 letters, but they can't really read. But Jack can read, so he's very precocious. He learns that a lot earlier than any other child, and his mind is full of songs, rhymes, literature, and TV shows for children, okay? So his language is a kind of artificial language in many ways, because it's a language for a child. That's why he lacks this capacity for interaction. At the same time, it is a very rich language. It is really very rich because it is selected. I mean, you don't select the language that the child receives when you live in society, but you know, it's like in many ways, it's like a privilege what he has. He also has his mother for himself all the time. So she monitors every learning process that he goes through, which is wonderful. So, but I think language is very important in the text also because in Emma Donoghue in general, music is important and folklore. I mean, for instance, in frog music is very important. And in many other novels, the language used is very important as well. But I think it's very accurate. I didn't find the narrative irritating, because the first time I read the novel, I had a kid of that same age. So I was kind of familiar with that, okay? That was the first time I read the novel, and then it just, you know, you're familiarized with it. And I think the violence, and I agree with you, Victor, comes from the distance between the child and the adult. Because the child is so frank, is so innocent, he's literal, he doesn't filter, and there's no filter because that's the only one he knows. And because there is no filter, he just says things, like when he counts the cracks of the bed. An adult reads that and you're shocked, you're really shocked, because it is the adult who adds all those meanings to what he is going through. That's why he's apparently fine and he is happy. And the adult cannot understand how he can be happy, you know, and fine after such experience, because he doesn't have those meanings. He hasn't, you know, he can't really make any relation between what he sees and any other way of looking at things.
Marisol, and the novel is not set in Ireland.
No.
No, it's set in the US, I think.
It is, in some interviews, it is unclear. It's never explicit. And there is a reference to a mall, you know, the big shopping center. So we think that it is it's set in the USA. But it is never explicit. You know, it has this universal quality.
Do you think it makes any difference to the story, or being her the author, an Irish Canadian writer, in her experience of immigration and things? I don't know. I was just thinking about.
I think, well, the first novels by Emma Donoghue were set in Ireland, and then she kind of set many of them, quite a few of them, not many, but quite a few of them in Great Britain, in London, or in Wales. I mean, Slammerkin is England and Wales. In The Sea Letter is London, in several different places. And then she moved to other places. I think she's a transnational writer, you see, and I think she wants to emphasize that, because also she's a lesbian writer, but she doesn't want to write only about, doesn't want to provide queer narratives. And she's mentioned this in many interviews. She sometimes, very often, writes about, you know, homosexual desire, which is an important issue in her writings, but not always. She also introduces straight people, and she doesn't write any. I mean, for instance, The Pool of the Stars is again set in Dublin in the early 20th century, okay? But no, the settings of her novels are very diverse. I'm thinking of Frog Music, I think it's California. So no, I think in Room she wanted to set the text in a universal, in a kind of universal place, so that, you know, you could not relate what she goes through with any culture, but it could be a more universal experience.
Yeah. Or maybe I don't know, but maybe thinking of media and the role of media, maybe the US would be more, things would be more intense there, or could be shown in a more, I don't know, this in a different way, and in which in that kind of society of consumerist, capitalist society, and this power of media, maybe it's more intense there. I don't know, it's just speculating.
Yeah, no, it could be, but what it is true is that nowadays he's better received in North America, Canada, and the United States than in Ireland. I mean, in Ireland she's regarded as a high-profile author, but still, she's not so present in the press as many of her other colleagues and writers. For instance, I'll give you an example that really shocked me. The Pool of the Stars was reviewed, positively reviewed instantly the moment it was published last July in the Washington Press, in the New York Times, obviously in other, I can't remember now the names of other Canadian newspapers. There's no review of The Pool of the Stars in the Irish Times. So this is connected with also with something that that many Irish writers have mentioned. You know, as soon as they leave their country, in a way, they are kind of, it's like what Joyce went through, James Joyce went through. You have Edna O'Brien, but you also have not Colm Tóibí so much, but Colm McCann. Many Irish writers who do not live in Ireland anymore receive less attention from Ireland than others. And this is something that Emma Donoghue has experienced as well. So now you look for reviews of her latest works, you will find more reviews in North American newspapers than in Irish newspapers. Also, in terms of scholars, publications and articles, it's more the international readership that she's, finding her appealing than the Irish readership. Conferences as well is very interesting. It is very interesting because I've been working in the work of Emma Donoghue for many years now, and I've presented papers in IASIL, on ABEI, wherever, and whenever I present a paper on her outside Spain with an Irish kind of context, they tell me, "Oh, you are a foreigner. You're attracted to Emma Donoghue." You see, I very rarely find an Irish person focusing on a writer like Emma Donoghue. And the same with Colm McCann, very similar to with Edna O'Brien. And it's so interesting because they are interested in them because it is part of their heritage. At the same time, these writers are read more widely by an international readership and academics.
Well, that's very interesting. So I think we should end this session. I would like to thank Professor Marisol and Professor Elisa. It was a great honor and pleasure being here today with you. And I'd like to invite everybody who's watching us right now to our next meeting of our book club. It is a stream here on YouTube, on ABEI's YouTube channel. So the grand finale will be on April 30th, okay? Would be in Portuguese, so yes. And for those who want to follow us on Instagram at ABEI Brazil, and our website's display on the screen. So again, thank you very much, Marisol and Elisa, and see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. All the best in these times.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.